I'm John Dodson, the director of the Global Taiwan Institute. We are a 501c3 think tank located in Washington, D.C., focused on contemporary Taiwan issues and U.S.-Taiwan relations. And we pursue this mission through a range of programs to include our fortnightly publication, the Global Taiwan Brief, available for free for reading on our website, as well as occasional special reports that we do. Podcast series that we have, including the Taiwan Salon, a podcast focused on Taiwan cultural issues, and GTI Insights. We also pursue this mission through periodic public policy discussion seminars, such as the one we're having today. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining us this morning, or this afternoon, or evening, wherever you may happen to be in the world, where we will be discussing today the prospects for cross-strait relations in 2023 and beyond. I think almost anyone would agree that the year 2022 was a very momentous year for Taiwan and developments surrounding Taiwan, to include an increasingly coercive campaign of People's Republic of China military activity, or coercive military activity, directed against Taiwan, as well as the visit in early August by U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan, and the large-scale military exercises that the Chinese military conducted in the immediate wake of that visit, accompanied as well shortly after by the release of a new official PRC policy white paper on Taiwan from Beijing, which further asserted, in some ways in even stronger language, Beijing's claims of sovereignty over Taiwan. And it also saw some noteworthy political events and developments, to include the Chinese Communist Party's 20th Party Congress held in October, which gave to Communist Party General Secretary Xi Jinping a third term in office, and perhaps may have set him up to effectively rule for life, but definitely strengthening his position over control of the Communist Party, and with it all the levers of the Chinese government. It also saw noteworthy elections, not just in the United States in terms of the midterm elections to determine control of Congress, as well as governorships and a number of other state offices, but also Taiwan's own 9-in-1 elections, as they are called, which determine a great many mayorships and other local and municipal offices. So there's certainly a great deal to discuss today as we look forward to the year ahead and what 2023 might bring in terms of U.S.-China relations, U.S.-Taiwan relations, and relations across the Taiwan Strait between Taipei and Beijing. So we're very fortunate to be joined this morning, or as the case may be, later in the evening in Taiwan, by some very distinguished experts. We have with us today Dr. Chun-Fang Yu, who is an assistant professor of political science at Suzhou University in Taipei. His research interests include authoritarian politics, party politics, political behavior in new democracies, and the trilateral relationship between the United States, China, and Taiwan. Dr. Chun obtained his PhD in political science from Michigan State University, where his dissertation topic was on ruling party institutionalization in autocracies, perhaps something with direct relevance to the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party, and our discussions here today. His research has been published in a number of academic journals, to include Political Science Quarterly, the Journal of East Asian Studies, and the Journal of Asian and African Studies. So, Dr. Chun, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks.
We're also fortunate to be joined by Dr. Chun-Liang Yu, or Evans Chun, who is an associate research fellow in the Division of National Defense Strategy and Resources at the Institute for National Defense and Security Research in Taipei, an official or semi-official think tank, I think, affiliated with the Ministry of National Defense in Taiwan. Dr. Shun received his PhD in political science from the University of California, Riverside, and his research and writing has focused on topics to include U.S. foreign policy, Asia-Pacific regional security issues, and Taiwan defense issues. And in addition to commentary in media outlets, his research has also been published in a number of academic journals, to include the Journal of Indo-Pacific Affairs, Eurasia Studies, and the Review of Global Politics. So Dr. Chun, thank you as well for joining us. And once again, a special note of thanks to both of our participants from Taiwan for joining us at an uncivilized hour, beginning at 10 p.m. So we're very fortunate to have the benefit of your expertise, and also your very kind willingness to do so at such an inconvenient hour. So thank you to you both. We're also joined today by Dr. June Teufel-Dreyer, who is a professor of political science at the University of Miami, as well as, I should note, a member of GTI's own advisory board. In addition to her current role on the faculty at the University of Miami, she has fulfilled a number of other roles throughout the years, to include a senior Far East specialist at the Library of Congress, as an Asia policy advisor to the Chief of Naval Operations, and also as a commissioner of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, a congressionally mandated commission to research and report to Congress on U.S.-China relations, where I also formerly served upon the staff a number of years back. So Dr. Dreyer, thank you very much for joining us today, ma'am.
I am waving to you, but you can't see me waving. The button says that it was looking for a WebEx connection to the video, and then it informed me it couldn't find a WebEx connection to the video. So I don't know what to do, but at least I can't worry about having a bad hair day, right?
All right. Well, I do apologize for the technical issues on that side of things. We will continue to see if we can troubleshoot that and get that figured out. So I apologize for that. We can hear you just fine, though.
Great.
Okay. All right. And last but not least, we also have with us Dr. Scott Kastner, who is a professor in the Department of Government and Politics at the University of Maryland. Dr. Kastner's research has focused primarily on the international politics of East Asia, and he's the author of multiple books, to include War and Peace in the Taiwan Strait, his most recent book, China's Strategic Multilateralism, Investing in Global Governance, and Political Conflict and Economic Interdependence Across the Taiwan Strait and Beyond. He obtained his PhD in political science from the University of California, San Diego, and is also published in a range of academic journals, to include International Security, the International Studies Quarterly, Comparative Political Studies, and the Journal of Contemporary China. And I see, yes, Dr. Dreyer, we see you, ma'am.
I had the feeling that if I pressed enough buttons, eventually something would work. And this always has the hazard that if you press the wrong button, everything disappears and never comes back. So I am absolutely delighted to be with you.
Oh, well, we're
now
thrilled
I'll shut
to
up
have you.
and let you get on.
Oh, no problem, no problem. I was going to say, to the list of your distinguished titles, I think we can now add IT technician to that.
Thank you. By the way, I was planning to waive this. This is a book that we published earlier this year with Jacques Delisle, called Taiwan in the Area of Tsai Ing-wen, and it is now available in paperback, just in case you missed the hardback version.
Excellent. Well, and just in time for everyone to add to their shopping list for Christmas.
Perfect.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, and glad we finally have the video feed up and working. I think without further ado, I would like to turn to our discussion. I think I've done enough talking, and I think the actually knowledgeable people should take over. And from this point, I think in terms of our order of speakers, I think I'm going to turn first to Dr. Kastner. if you would. I think I will turn the electronic floor, our virtual floor, over to you, sir, for your comments. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah, hear you great.
Great. Thank you, John. And thank you to the Global Taiwan Institute for inviting me. I really appreciate this chance to engage with you and to have a chance to kind of be on this panel with such well-known experts on Taiwan. I just wanted to say in kind of my brief remarks a few things about kind of the big picture in the Taiwan Strait and the US-China-Taiwan relationship, and then let the other speakers kind of speak to more kind of current events and recent developments. So I think, as John was noting in his introductory remarks, it kind of goes without saying that that the relationship across the Taiwan Strait has been quite turbulent in recent months, and indeed over the past several years, as indicated most obviously by kind of the increased military activity that we've seen by the PRC around Taiwan. And this in turn has led to, I think, a growing sense among many that the risk of military conflict in the Taiwan Strait is something that is growing. And we see this, for instance, in kind of media accounts of the Taiwan Strait. So we've seen Taiwan become much more prominent in media outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post in recent years. We've seen even magazines like the New Yorker and the Atlantic have kind of extensive articles that have kind of probed the risk of military conflict in the Taiwan Strait and some of the conundrums facing Taiwan that have appeared recently. And so I think this kind of speaks to kind of a growing awareness of a risk of military conflict in the Taiwan Strait. And it's an awareness, I think, that's really been kind of put into focus by the war in Ukraine, which has kind of shown that even among states that are pretty integrated into global markets and that are fairly developed, war is certainly something that's not obsolete in today's world. And we also see this kind of concern about the risk of military conflict coming out of official Washington. And so we've seen high-ranking military officials kind of point to this danger. The then head of Indo-PACOM, in remarks to Congress last year, warned about kind of a risk of military conflict over the next 6 years or so. The chief of naval operations a couple months ago kind of indicated that the risk of military conflict is something that's quite real, even in the near term. And the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, in remarks a couple months ago, kind of hinted at a growing risk of military conflict in kind of noting that he believed that China under Xi Jinping is on an accelerated timetable for dealing with the Taiwan issue. So it's something, kind of the risk of military conflict is something that's getting a lot of attention. And I think with fairly good reason. There certainly are kind of some reasons to be concerned about where things are going in the Taiwan Strait. Most obvious, I think, is the rapid shift in recent years in the military balance of power in the region and kind of growing Chinese military capabilities, which mean that to an extent that wasn't the case a couple decades ago, it's possible to kind of imagine a scenario kind of looking forward where the PRC could launch an attack against Taiwan with some kind of reasonable prospect of success. And there's also a reason to be concerned because of kind of political trends, I think, in the PRC. Xi Jinping has indicated on various occasions, I think, or at least given hints to the effect that he views Taiwan as a priority and wants to see progress on unification. And obviously he's really consolidated power in the aftermath of the 20th Party Congress. And so I think that there's reason to be concerned. And one thing that I really want to emphasize is that both the PRC and the United States, I think are kind of look at the Taiwan Strait with some degree of pessimism and kind of how they kind of look at what's going on in the Taiwan Strait. So from the US perspective, there's great reason to be concerned about kind of the shifting balance of military power and kind of some of these trends in the political sphere in China that I mentioned. But from China's perspective, there's also kind of reasons to be concerned, most notably about kind of political and social trends in Taiwan, increasingly, people in Taiwan over the past couple of decades don't identify really as Chinese anymore. They self-identify as Taiwanese. Politically, it's kind of increasingly hard, I think, kind of looking, especially over the long term, to kind of imagine a candidate kind of emerging victorious for president who's really kind of seriously advocating for anything resembling progress on reunification with the PRC. And so I think there's reasons for Beijing to be concerned about where things are going in Taiwan, but also where things are going in the US-Taiwan security relationship and kind of trends in US security relations with other countries in the region. Clearly, US-Taiwan security relations have improved in recent years. Taiwan's gotten a lot of attention in the US Congress, and Taiwan's increasingly kind of emphasized in other US alliance relationships, most notably with Japan. And so I think that the PRC is concerned about these trends. And this kind of pessimism that we see, I think, in both the United States and the PRC about, to some degree, kind of where things are going in the Taiwan Strait, I worry kind of gives rise to what sort of looks like security dilemma dynamics, where both the United States and the PRC at times kind of frame what they're doing with regard to Taiwan as kind of reacting to what the other side is doing. And so the United States often kind of frames efforts to improve security ties with Taiwan or to kind of make Taiwan more central in other alliances as reacting to kind of a growing threat against Taiwan coming from the PRC, as evidenced by not only the PRC's military modernization, but also the military activities that's been undertaking around Taiwan, kind of frequent incursions into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, crossing the midline, circumnavigating the island with military aircraft and so forth. And so often these are kind of framed as kind of reacting to this kind of growing threat. But the PRC sometimes kind of frames its activities as also reacting, especially not only to kind of what's going on in Taiwan, but especially what's going on in kind of the US security relationship with Taiwan. And I think there's a great deal of concern about that. And so I am concerned about kind of the possibility of kind of a security dilemma dynamic and action-reaction spiral kind of developing in the Taiwan Strait. Okay, so I think there are reasons to be very concerned about the risk of military conflict and kind of the risks of kind of increased or continued hostility in the Taiwan Strait. But I want to kind of conclude my brief remarks by just kind of emphasizing as well that I do think that there are reasons to be at least somewhat guardedly optimistic about the ability of the parties to avoid military conflict. I do not personally view conflict as at all inevitable. And I think that there are still very powerful stabilizing forces at play. Most obvious, I think, is the reality that a military gambit by Beijing remains an extremely kind of risky proposition for the PRC. And I think the war in Ukraine has kind of really illustrated how risky that could be. It's very likely that the United States would become involved in some way in a conflict, and that means that it could escalate with unpredictable consequences for the PRC and certainly the possibility of kind of catastrophic military outcomes. And more broadly, I think it's really important to emphasize that all three parties, the United States, China, and Taiwan, continue to have a pretty significant stake, I think, in maintaining some semblance of stability in the Taiwan Strait. Even though we've seen this kind of deep rift emerge in US-China relations over the past several years, and kind of some steps toward decoupling occur between the two economies, including the trade war, it remains the case that the two economies continue to be highly intertwined economically. The PRC continues to be highly integrated and dependent on access to global markets. Taiwan is highly integrated into global markets and is kind of still critical for kind of key components like most obviously advanced semiconductors. And what this means is that I think a war would be kind of catastrophically costly for all three parties. And I do believe that this continues to act as a significant constraint on conflict. So I'll just kind of stop there and turn it over to the other presenters. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Kastner. I think that is very helpful in sort of helping to frame some of these issues in a larger sense. And I took away from your comments. Well, I mean, there's a number of questions that occur to me, but particularly, I'm really interested in this the sort of the I would say the underlying fundamental dynamics underlying either problems in cross-strait relations or the fundamental problems between China and the U.S. in terms of security competition. And again, this question is to, are we or are we not locked into a future of conflict or confrontation because of these sort of the underlying fundamentals, the tectonic plates, I guess it is, or is there a way to look past that? And, are we either locked into, again, as you referred to it, an action-reaction cycle in a more immediate sense, or even stepping back from that if there is indeed a Thucydides trap, as is often invoked between the U.S. and the United States and China? Is that genuine or not? So, but again, perhaps something we could get into a little bit more in the discussion or the Q&A later. And with that, I wanted to pause for a moment to say once again, to give a note of thanks to our audience watching online, and to remind all of you that you too are part of this conversation. And after our panelists have had their chance to speak with their introductory comments, we will be turning to questions and answers later on, for which we would very much welcome your participation. If you do have questions that you would like to direct to our panelists, you can either enter them into the YouTube chat room if you're watching on the YouTube live stream, or you may email questions as well to contact@globaltaiwan.org. Again, contact@globaltaiwan, all as one word. No periods or underscores, globaltaiwan.org. So please do so, and we will look forward to your questions. I think I would like to turn next to one of our participants from Taiwan. I'm going to turn to Dr. Chunliang Yu, or Evans Chun, as many of us know him, who I had the chance to meet briefly earlier this year on a visit, and who I believe was a previous research fellow at GTI for a time, I believe. But once again, we're I'm sorry? Go ahead.
Visiting scholar to GTI.
Yeah. Well, again, so I think I'm going to turn the virtual floor over to you, sir, for your comments. So please take it away.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, John, and also thanks for the invitation from GTI. The topic assigned to me is to talk about the security dynamics surrounding Taiwan. So today I will focus on three dimensions of China, the US, and Taiwan. And actually, as I discuss the factor of China, perhaps, is highly related to the US. So definitely I will talk about, the position of the United States, and then move on to talk about Taiwan. So let me focus on the situation after the CCP's 20th Party Congress in October. I think during the conference and after the conference, we can see Xi Jinping's power is much more stronger and more powerful. I think that's also more concentrated rather than before. So that means that the CCP or the PLA or Xi Jinping, they might be more active and more aggressive toward the Taiwan issue. So let's look at the personnel or the position assignments for the Central Committee of the CCP. We can see Zhang Youxia is still the member of the political bureau of the Central Committee of the party. And definitely, he is the deputy chairman of the Military Commission of the Central Committee. And the new one, and also the second one, we can see He Weidong. He's also the second member of the political bureau of the Central Committee of the party. And he was the former commander of the Eastern Theater Command. So media, international media analysis mentioned that, well, look at this, position assignments. You can see Xi Jinping definitely had the ideas to put the PLA's top rank officers in the political arena. So that's one. And the second one, perhaps we can look at the issues of Russia-Ukraine war. Well, I have two hypotheses. Hypothesis one, if Russia is much more successful in the Ukraine battlefield, we can imagine that China or Xi Jinping might be more encouraged and will be more willing, active to invade Taiwan. And hypothesis two, if Russia is, unsuccessful in the Ukraine battlefield, and then I might argue that China will be more conservative, be more careful to conduct its plans of, Taiwan invasion. But I think it's still hard to say, because when Xi Jinping sees the failure or the fault of Moscow's, in the Ukraine battlefield, and Xi Jinping or the PLA will consider that perhaps they don't have too much time. They don't have that kind of, opportunity anymore, because, the Western world and the US, they consolidate, they allied together much more and more compared to, before. So it might be, oppositionally, stress up or speed up its plan of Taiwan invasion. So it's hard to say. So at this moment, I think we definitely, over the past weeks, we can see the Ukraine side seems to be more successful in the battlefield. So I still cannot, make a conclusion or summary of how Xi Jinping or how, the PLA really calculate their opportunities of, the plan of Taiwan invasion. So it's still very uncertain. And let's move on to look at the third factor of China's side. That's, China's military modernization. I think that's kind of, consistent, because Beijing considers its opportunity to win the United States is through its military, modernization, and keep going on developing its, naval power. So I think that's the key, and we call it internal balancing in IR theories, which means that, Beijing or China look at its own military capability to conflict or to confront with the United States. And number four, I look at, China's relationship with the US, or we can say, that's US attitudes toward the situations in the Taiwan Strait. I think over the past weeks, over the past years, the US is definitely, to me, preparing for the, potential conflict in the Taiwan Strait. But still, many analysis or media arguing that, well, actually the US is not, well prepared for the potential conflict in the Strait. So I think it's still debatable. It's still controversial to me. To me, I still can say, well, I can say on the one hand, the U.S. is definitely preparing for the potential conflict. But on the other hand, the U.S. is still, keeping to talk to China on the other hand. So we can see Xi and Biden, President Biden and Xi, they met, they talked in G20. And later on, we can see like the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and the Pacific Affairs, Daniel Crittenbrick, and the Senior Director for China National Security Council of the White House, Laura Rosenberger. They just went to visit Beijing this week and to promote State Secretary Blinken's visit to China next year. So we can see, well, the U.S., on the one hand, still preparing for the potential conflict, and on the other hand, keeping its engagement with China. And we also can see, that's an advantage, or that's a big advantage for the U.S. to emphasize its allies, such as, the relationships with Japan, Australia, Canada, and the UK. So I think Washington continues its efforts on, emphasizing, enhancing its capability of the allies. And recently, probably we can see, AUKUS maybe will plus Japan in the future. So probably I cannot agree with that, some media mentioning that, the U.S. is not preparing, probably is not preparing very well for the potential conflict, but I think the U.S. is doing something. Okay, let's move on to the Taiwanese side. Well, in my observation, I think well, some of my American friends and also friends who serve in international media question me that, the question that, if Taiwan is really determined to self-defense or not. To me, I think the DPP government or the President Tsai Ing-wen, under her leadership, I think over the past years, Taiwan definitely showed its determinations to reform some military agenda. But to be honest, in my observations and also to my friends who serve in international media, they probably will say, it's still not enough. It's still not fast enough for Taiwan to conduct, the military reform. And that's kind of, probably, Taiwan's, determinations of self-defense is not strong enough. So that's another issue. And number two, I think we can see the U.S. or the Biden administration still continue arms sales to Taiwan. Just on December 6th, the Pentagon also approved the 7th arms sales to Taiwan. So I think over the past years, militarily, politically, economically, I think Washington definitely promotes a lot its support to Taiwan. Okay. And then number three and then number four, I will focus on Taiwan's domestic politics related to military issue. One is about the extensions, the issue of extensions of the military service for Taiwanese people. I think that's part of Taiwan's domestic politics. And it's very controversial and very political to the people, to the nation, also to the international society or to the U.S. Well, under this kind of circumstance, definitely we might argue that that's correct to extend the period or the years of military service. But it's still very controversial, or is still opposite to some of Taiwanese politicians or Taiwanese political parties on the islands. So what's the main reason of the debate on this issue? And then we can move on to look at perhaps the KMT or the opposition, they probably don't agree with or support the extension, because that's kind of aggressive signal to provoke Beijing. But for the DPP, as I talked to some of my friends in DPP, they told me that they do have the concerns of Taiwan's security. They told me that they might also have kind of pressure from Washington. So they try to extend that the military service. So still, it's kind of political debate between the blue and the green. And number 4, I will talk about just the local elections on November 26th. What the results of the local election, perhaps Beijing is or was happy with the result. But on the other hand, I think Beijing would not be very happy or will be still unhappy, because Beijing considered that the blue or the KMT, the possibility or the opportunity for the KMT to take power back in 2024 is still questionable. So the local elections 2022, perhaps that's a happy result for the KMT, but it's not always happy with Beijing, because Beijing still have its concern about the presidential election in 2024. So it's still hard to say, but definitely we can see Beijing still conduct its societal, social influence, economic influence, and the political influence, media influence over the island. So that's still very challenging beyond the military for Taiwan's security. And finally, I will talk about supply chain. Well, we can just see the TSMC just had its opening ceremony in Phoenix, Arizona, a couple of weeks ago, the week before. So I think China still conduct its kind of fake news or social media influence to argue that, see, that's kind of de-Taiwanizations of Taiwan's high tech, and that create or generate another debate or controversial issue for the Taiwanese public or the Taiwanese society. So to me, probably the US and the Taiwan or the democracies have to consider how to counterattack against China's kind of sharp power, or the conduction of the fake news, or the influence of social media of democracy. So that's my observation, and I stop here. and I look forward to the Q&A. Yeah, thank you, John.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Chung. You've certainly given us a great deal to think about there. And again, a very sort of comprehensive overview of the different security issues affecting Taiwan and affecting Taiwan and U.S. relations. In regards to that, I mean, something I might be curious to ask you a bit more about, or to draw out a little bit more in the Q&A, is a topic that I personally find to be of great interest, which is the sort of the dynamic of sort of discussions between U.S. And Taiwan defense planners and scholars and commentators, and some of the differences of opinion or perspective that sometimes appear to be present, and some of the frictions that may create. But again, something I might perhaps try to draw out a little bit more in the Q&A, because I'd be very interested in hearing your thoughts and perspectives on that. But once again, thank you for your comments. I think next I would like to turn amongst our speakers to Dr. Dreyer, who has both a long career focused on the study and analysis of elite politics in the PRC and within the Chinese Communist Party, a great deal of detailed research on the PRC political system and how it operates, as well as I believe a recent extensive commentary on the 20th Party Congress that was published through the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and which I read with great interest. So, and I'd be very much interested in hearing Dr. Dreyer's comments on the 20th Party Congress and other recent political developments that could affect all these, again, the trilateral relationship between the U.S., China, and Taiwan. So, Dr. Dreyer, I think I will turn the virtual floor over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dodson. I'm pleased to be here. And Professor Chung, you've given us a great deal to think about in your commentary. And one of the threads I'd like to pick up for a moment before we get to the 20th Party Congress is to what extent Ukraine is a model. And you raised the hypothesis, number one, that Russia wins. I would say that train has left the station. Russia has not won. And I cite as my authority the commander of the British forces on page 1 of today's Financial Times. And he said, Russia has lost. It is running out of ammunition. And, you know, of course, it's very difficult for somebody like Putin, who has a very healthy ego, shall we say, to say, okay, I'm out of here. But he has run out of ammunition, whereas many countries continue to supply Ukraine. And the initial objective, and I regret to say one of which was shared by our military experts here in the United States, was that it was all going to be over in a week. Putin was going to install a puppet government in Ukraine, and the annexation would be complete. Now, having said that, is Ukraine a model for China? Looking at that, is it going to see this as a deterrent? And I think the answer is they're saying we can learn from this and do it better. And second, pointing up the differences between Taiwan and Ukraine. And this is not always to the benefit of Taiwan, because what happened, and I'm not sure this has been in the papers very much. Journalists tend to concentrate on what's going on right now. But the United States military has been quietly, not secretly, but quietly training Ukrainian military since 2014, ever since the annexation of Crimea. And the Ukrainians are eager pupils. They also have a number of Russian model weapons, some of them manufactured in Ukraine, and they are very good at maintenance. Whereas in the situation in Russia, you have the Russian military below the ranks of the top generals is not very enthusiastic about the war in Ukraine. And Russian maintenance has always been awful. And you've seen that with tanks, the treads are coming off and things like that, and sloppy repairs. So the PLA is doubtless saying that's not going to happen with us. Also, the Russian military is low. It's getting conscripts. The conscripts are ill-trained. They are unenthusiastic about going into battle, even when threatened with being shot in the back by their officers. They are eager to defect. And this is probably not going to be the case with the PLA, which in any case has unlimited manpower. So in that sense, the situation is very different. Now, what about, okay, in Ukraine, Russia can invade across the border. Not so in Taiwan, but not to the advantage of Taiwan. The Taiwan has been neglecting its military for decades and decades. The shortening of the period for enlistment is shockingly low. And particularly when you're dealing with more advanced weapons, you need more time training them. And this is just not happening. And in a way, one of Taiwan's enemies is its high-tech economy, because there are better jobs in high-tech than there are in the military. And another issue is that if the decision is made to invade, the PLA has big advantages. If you look at the two coasts of Taiwan, the major ports are all on the western side, i.e., closest to China. The ones on the eastern side are smaller. They have a limited capacity, and we would no doubt that the Chinese could impose a successful blockade on the western side. They would have a harder time on the eastern side, but the ports on the eastern side, Suao, etc., are not capable of absorbing what is needed to sustain Taiwan. And furthermore, once you get there, let us say you got the equipment in, you have to get it over the mountain hump to the western side of Taiwan, and that is not going to be easy. So military experts think that that China would be able to sustain that blockade indefinitely. I am not a logistics expert, so I have to take what they say on faith, but they sound to me as if they know what they're talking about. The other problem is that the United States, like a number of other powers, has a very fickle public opinion. They're in there swinging at the beginning, and the longer something goes on, the less enthusiastic they get. And a number of my friends who are staunch conservatives are saying, how long are we really going to stick with Ukraine? I'm shocked by this. Ukraine is not Afghanistan. We should have got out of there long ago. But I'm shocked by what they're saying. And could they say the same thing about Taiwan? The other thing is the shocking level of ignorance that goes on. I have actually heard people say, at least one person say, well, the PLA could carry out a surgical strike against Taiwan, and nothing would happen to the computer chip industry in Taiwan. That, ladies and gentlemen, is ridiculous. No such thing as a surgical strike against Taiwan. that would not hurt the semiconductors. And naturally, Morris Chang, who is a very, very smart man, it was my privilege to meet him when I was a commissioner. He knows what he's talking about. And so dispersing to a certain extent or diversifying the production to Arizona is a really good idea. And however, the high-end chips are going to continue to be made in Taiwan. And that is a good idea, just in case the United States should turn fickle. And you can see whose side I'm on here. So again, a very iffy proposition, but one in which a lot of Americans don't seem to understand, and in which our journalists are not properly educating them. Now, again, I agree with Dr. Chun. There have been some steps taken toward preparedness, and the chapter in the book that Jacques and I put out was written by York Chun, who knows what he's talking about. And he goes into, he's not exactly unbiased in this since he was in the government when he wrote it, but he is very astute. And he points out just what a difficult road President Tsai has had, because there's a lot of concern in Taiwan. Do we want our recruits to be run ragged until they drop dead of exhaustion? That kind of thing. And then another feeling, well, we can never catch up. We can never be what the PLA is, so let's not even try, kind of thing. So I want to credit President Tsai with doing a lot, but it's not nearly enough. And now, the November Taiwan elections, and I would caution here that what the Chinese say in public is, as you all know, necessarily what they're saying to each other in private. And what you will see if you read the Chinese newspapers is, oh yes, the Taiwan voters have repudiated the DPP and its hardline attitude, and it doesn't show a darn thing, because those elections were local, and they were not fought on unification. They were fought on local issues. Now, I also know, again from my time on the commission, that the analysts, the guys you meet, and unfortunately speaking as a feminist, they were all guys, once I met, were very well informed and very rational on whatever topic you gave them. So they know that the November elections were not a repudiation of the DPP or a repudiation of the hardline, the quote, hardline DPP view. But are they getting through to the policymakers at the top? And this is the great unknown. Professor Chun, you mentioned a lot of things are unknown, and this is definitely one of them. Now, since my time has probably already run out, I will get to that 20th Party Congress. And when you consider, I mean, Taiwan was only a tiny part of it. And of course, she took a hardline view because he couldn't do otherwise. But look back at that. The real question in here is the August 9, 2022 white paper. And that was definitely hardline, wherein things that were in previous white papers just weren't there in the August 22 one. It doesn't give assurances about the specific rights that Taiwan would enjoy after unification.